Hi, Beth Neville for Art and Life on our porch in our garden. And this is the season for zinnias. The nurseries are selling them now, beautiful, ready to go. All we have to do is pay for it and bring it home. So this is a continuation of our first video where I cut off the zinnia, now looking pretty wilty and sad. And out of that, I got this drawing, and I started by filling in the color of the zinnia. This is a very painstaking type of drawing, and so I needed to get kind of a head start. So what I intend to do today is to show you here how I'm going to interpret the leaves. And I'm going to use a technique where you put a light color on first, and then a darker color to show the veins of the zinnia leaves. Then after we do that, I got another head start with this drawing, and Tom Pillow is going to have it up on the screen, so you'll be able to see it. As I've mentioned before, now that I'm doing these videos, I've been using magic marker so you could see the drawing, but there's no way I'm going to do a detailed watercolor with a magic marker outline. I think that's pretty obvious. So with watercolor, I feel it's quite all right to do pencil first. When I began learning how to do watercolor, I was quite concerned about using a pencil. We were in the middle of the abstract expressionist era, and you were supposed to just be very free, and nobody drew anything first, and your emotions just were what were most important, and the stroke of the brush, and so on. So I did some watercolors that way. I tried it out, and struggling to learn by myself how to do watercolor. And I went to museums frequently to look and see how the great masters did watercolor. And I was staring at a Winslow Homer, an exquisite Winslow Homer watercolor of the sea, and I said, "Oh, how interesting. He used pencil. There's graphite. I can see the pencil marks." So I decided if it's okay for Winslow Homer, who I consider to be the greatest watercolorist ever, then it's going to be okay for me. And there's our blue jay coming to go to our bird feeder. You can hear him squawking in the distance. It's quite a windy day today. We had a hurricane yesterday, so you're going to hear the sound of the wind and the blue jays and so on. All right, we're going to change the focus so that the camera is showing down on the paper, and then I'll begin to demonstrate how I use this particular technique, which is closest to botanical art. I'm not a botanical artist, but it's closer to that than it is to a free form type of watercolor, which I could also do. But today I'm just going to show you the kind where you do a very detailed, accurate botanical drawing first, and then you basically interpret that with watercolor. I'm going to show you something that I do with dried up watercolors. Sometimes they dry up even when you put on the top tightly. So I need some more greens, and this one, an oxide green, is quite dry. But if we cut it open with some scissors and add some water to it, being careful not to rip up the brush, we can get additional color out of it. So here's another one. This is a very useful color. This is olive green. This also feels like it's dried up. Maybe not. Let me just see here. Oh no, it is indeed. So you go to the back end of the tube, which unfolds, and right about here I can tell there's paint. So I'm going to take a scissors, cut that open, see if I can get in here. All right, this is going to be harder than, sometimes I have to stick a knife in there, but I don't have a knife right now. Let me just see if we can't. All right, I hope I don't kill myself here. Oh boy. Children, if you're watching, don't do this. All right, let's cut it again. Let's try another cut. Okay, it's not opening up. Here we go. I have to use my fingernails. The best way to do it would be to have a knife. and insert the knife. So being careful not to rip the bristles, we can get in here and get this very nice olive green, which I think is the color we're going to be using. And there's a little bit of viridian in here. This viridian, here's our olive green. And we're mixing that together. What I'm looking for, where's my dead zinnia? Okay, here's the dying zinnia. We can see that it is an olive green. It just couldn't be more clear that this is what a perfect match. You can just see that's a great match. So in interpreting this drawing, there are several areas of the zinnia leaf that come forward. And those we're going to start. Remember, this is only this is a first layer. So you're going to come in here with a yellow. Yellow is a forward color, comes forward. And wherever we see or need to interpret the part of the leaf that is in front of the front curl, I think we talked on the last video that these leaves for the zinnia are very, very convoluted. They dip and they dive and they twist in all kinds of wonderful ways. You'll notice here I'm using a very small brush. This is a really destroyed old brush, good grief. Lowell Cornell is the name of it, from 1810 is the founding of the company. And it's so, it is such a thin brush and so old that the number has worn off, so I can't tell you the number, but oh man, I'd guess like a 2 or 3, a very small one. All right, now for the highlights here on this leaf, I'm going to stay with that yellowy color, mixing it in here, a little bit of cadmium yellow. Following, when you're painting with watercolor or painting in general, you have to remember you're not filling in. You're interpreting the shape of the leaf or the flower. So your movements should mimic the shape you're trying to interpret, and not just say, okay, you're not going back and forth this way. The curves go this way. All right, we're going to fill that in with a little bit lighter color. I like to leave white. White makes it sparkle. That's the how you get life into watercolor is with the addition. So that's the first coat. Now the first layer. Now let's go back to this leaf. We want a highlight over here. So we're going to keep this fairly light. We want a highlight here. This is the forward part. All right, up in front. That's forward. Maybe if I hold this upside down, you'll be able to see better what I'm doing. All right, this is going to be a highlighted area here. So we go with the yellow green, maybe a little bit of a highlight here. And then a highlight on the stem, coming up in here. All right, now a little highlight here. We've got a good drying conditions, so this is going to dry fairly quickly, which will be nice. I think while we're at it, I think you can see that I left a lot of white in interpreting the red zinnia. There are many, many little sparkly whites, and that's white paper. That's what gives watercolor its sparkle, its loose, fresh feeling, is to leave the white paper. And in this design, I particularly like the opening here and here. Zinnias tend to be formal, but they often have erratic patterns with petals, just like the leaves. The leaves dip and dive, and the petals of the flower dip and dive. So it's kind of nice to have some openings in there. Now this is pretty much dry, so I'm going to go for a deeper tone or a deeper value. This is probably a little bit of sap green in here. No viridian. I can't stand viridian for leaves. It's just the only thing viridian's good for is painting the emerald isle or an emerald piece of jewelry. Otherwise, it's a useless color. Okay, here we go for a slightly darker value. This would be in shadow because it's behind. So let's make that a little darker. This is another area of shadow in here, going behind. That got a little bit darker, but there's no harm in that because we're going to darken everything anyway. All right, and coming up here and around the curve. This area would be darker because it's behind. All right, that's connected with that. These are connected. So we're trying to get a flow going here. This is behind. All right. This is not interpreting very well, but I'm not going to worry about it yet. Okay, we're going to come in here with a darker value here, particularly heading up underneath the red. Certainly want a darker value there. Okay, this is behind. This is definitely behind. So that should be darker. And this is darker here. All right, this comes around. It's darker here. That's behind this. I have to turn it back around so I can see where I'm going here. All right, this comes this way. All right, this is a forward part. Now I think we have to make this leaf match the other two. These have got the more intense green. So I'm going to say intense green here, darker value coming down there. Just maybe make this half darker. All right, maybe a little darker in here. And this indentation, let's increase that. All right, coming up here. All right, and then the stem. I don't want to overwork this one. I want to keep it very fresh, as is so it matches the quality of the freshness of the flower itself. So I think maybe we'll put a little bit of a hint there. Okay, we're going to intensify the value, deepen the value just a little bit. Here, 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 definitely. In there, in there. Here. All right, I'm beginning to think, let me hold it up. Let's see. Got a perspective on this. Oh yeah, that's it. That's it. I wouldn't do anything more to it. I think we'll just stop right there. If I continue to work with it or add another color, it wouldn't be in balance. This is pure reddish hue. This is pure green hue. If we started adding cerulean or violet or whatever, it would change the whole character of this watercolor. And I think it should have, it's just a simple white background, keep it very fresh, and not begin to overplay the color. So we're going to stop with this one, and we're going to get out a much more complex watercolor, much more complex. There's no way I'm going to be able to finish this today on camera. So what I'm hoping to do is give you sort of an idea of where I'm going with this in terms of composition and procedure, and then I'll finish it at my leisure. It'll probably take me, I think, to paint this watercolor, I would say probably 2 hours of fairly intense work, which I love doing. I enjoy it tremendously, so it's not I find it very relaxing. My backache goes away when I do my watercolors. So we'll finish it, and then I'll do a critique of it at the end of this show. So there'll be a time lapse between the time that I finish this drawing and the time that I describe to you what's happened. So the composition, I hope you can see from the image behind me. I've placed one zinnia here. This drawing was based directly on the pot of zinnias. So here's one zinnia here. There's another one here, another full one here, and a fourth down here. But I found the buds, the formation, to be also very interesting. So here's a tiny little bud here, another bud here. This one's a little more developed, and this one is beginning to sprout color at the top. And this one, of course, these centers. Oh, here's another one that is more developed. So let's take them in order of their development. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then the others are full blown. So I'm trying to figure out where I should start. Let's say this one in the center is going to be the red. It's going to be this one. So in the center here is the red part here, and that color matches the petals. So, and I've looked at it carefully. It goes in a swirling pattern. So I'm going back to my red paints. I have to get the green out of the brush. Heaven help us, we don't want any green in there. Good grief. No green. Okay, this is Scarlet Lake, a very orangey red, which is appropriate. And then to give it the red a little more intensity, I'm using Rose Madder, which is a violet red. So you can see how violet that is. So I'm mixing a violet red and an orange red together to try to really intensify the color. Okay, now we're going to go back into the center here, and I'm going to start interpreting that as a little set of swirls. It just, I sort of want to make a big deal out of that, I think. So there's the little set of swirls. Now the next part, here, the little yellow florets in here, I've already done. And in last week's video that I did this morning, I said these had 4 parts. That is incorrect. I looked at them very carefully. They're 5, which is quite kind of breaks the norm. Most flowers are in 3s or 6s. 3, 6, whatever, 9. So to be in 5 is, I find, unusual. But indeed, I looked very carefully at them, and they have 5 parts. These weird little colors things here that look green, they actually are almost green, is the outside of a red petal. So the petals in the inside are red, and on the outside they're green. Now if you turn a red zinnia upside down, that green, the petal is a different color on the outside. It's red on the outside, and here it's kind of a pale pink. So it's one of these flowers that has 2 different types of coloration, one outside and one inside. And it's very clear and if you examine these little tiny petals that are barely formed, the green is actually the backside of the petal. It's not a green anything, except it's the reverse side of the petal. So that's pretty difficult to interpret. What I did here, I really emphasized that. On this particular one, which is down, actually, you know what? Let me get it up here. Okay, now, can you get the camera on that one?
Yes.
Okay, if we examine this bud closely, each one of these little spear-like shapes is going to develop into a petal. And if you look closely, you will see there's a pink tinge at the top. It's green. When that little thing unfurls, it's going to be it'll be the red petal that's furthest out. These will become that, and they're going to be bright red. And right now they're green because the reverse side, the back side, is showing. So the way I interpreted that was to paint them all green, and then when it dried, it has to be dry, otherwise you get blurry mush. I added the little pink at the top. So I think that's going to work, and I've got the red in here. So I could go back and interpret this. In fact, no, let's not. Let's just stick with this one. So now we have to go back to green. Got to get into the green here, the yellowy green. Kind of one of our sap greens. And we're going to put in some of these little greenish shapes that are in there. These are the leaves that will develop. Actually, probably not, because the flower is already pretty well defined, but that's the green. And while we're at it, I could add another detail up here. Supposing I emphasize one side of each of these. You see, to do this type of work, you have to have a very thin brush that comes to a very exact point. And if you have a big scrubby brush, you'll be very, very frustrated. Okay, I think that's all we're going to do for that. And maybe in a minute, when that dries, I can show you how I'm going to interpret the center of this particular bud. Now, back down here, this is dry. So going back to the red, when you clean your brush, do not jam the bristles down. This metal shaft will break the bristles. So when you clean your brush, you don't go jam, jam, jam down and ruin your brush. You do it very gently and carefully. Okay, now I'm going to start interpreting the red petals. And I'm going to start, well, I want it more vivid than that. That's a little wimpy. I don't want a pink zinnia, I want a red zinnia. So let's get back here. The more water you add, the paler it gets. So if you want a pink, you add water. If you want it to be red, well, I think I really overdid it. Yeah, that's a little too much. Okay, so now let's see what we've got. Some people have a piece of paper handy, a scrap piece, and before they start painting, they try out the color. I'm pretty secure in my knowledge about watercolor, so I rarely do that because I've got a pretty good sense for what color I'm dealing with. I can see it on the palette. It's important to have a white palette over here so that you can see what color you're dealing with. If your palette's dirty or it's got a funny shade or something, you're not going to be able to do this. Now you can certainly see why I'm saying I'm not going to be able to finish this on camera. Because each petal has to be filled out individually. Let's cover up this pink one that was too pink. And you'll notice I'm going every other one. Now, why is that? It's because if you put them next to each other, they're going to run together. Wet colors run together. So if you want a mush instead of a zinnia, you're going to paint them all one right after another. Those have got to dry. So what you do while you're waiting around, I call it hopscotch. Okay, I'm going to go way out to here. This is a petal that's not touching any of the petals that I've previously painted. Here's another one over here. All right, we're going to paint this one. It's not next to anything. Here's another one here. Well, it's a little close to that one, but not too close. All right, and now let's go to over here. And you can see why I would need a pencil line. You know, I would be utterly lost with this style of painting if I didn't have a pencil line. I painted many different styles. I'm not a stylistic purist. I enjoy being able to paint many, many different ways. So I don't always paint this way. I sometimes paint, as I said, without lines. But for this quasi-botanical style of painting, you need to have your lines or you get lost. And I think I said in the earlier video that it depends on observation, depends on how carefully you look and examine what you're doing. Now we're going to go deep in here. You notice I am leaving a little bit of a white space around my petals, and that's deliberate. I could go right up to the edge, but I like the light. I like the airiness, the sparkle. That's the best way to describe it. the sparkle that you get in watercolor if you leave a little bit of white. Now, we have to remember this is the first layer of paint, and we're going to add additional layers of paint that will help to pull one leaf away from the other and create shadows underneath the leaves. I am very fortunate for a person my age to still have a hand that has no tremor. I pray to God that that and my eyesight will continue for many years, but I know from many years of teaching older people painting, I've done that for many, many years, having a hand tremor is very common among older people. That doesn't mean they can't paint. You can still paint, but you will not be able to paint the way I'm doing it now. Just, you know, you've got to have a steady hand. And what I'm looking at is the point of the paintbrush. If you want to know where your paintbrush is going and what it's filling in, you have to keep your eye on the point of the brush. That's that you look at your line, but you also look at the point. And you can see I'm continuing to move around here, going around, turning, keep turning. There's one that's a little paler, but that's kind of fun. There's another one here. And I start with a point, and then when I come to the end, I kind of just curl around. So here we are, we're making the shape of the, going in first, then curling around. And the zinnias really, you know, begin to look like a zinnia. And we're fortunate today, the weather is drying. I'm using a new pad of paper. I'm very pleased with it. Paint is taking very well on this pad. It's a very old pad, but working very nicely. And this is a weird, I don't think I drew that one correctly. All right, well, I've got one more here. All right, and I remember now that I drew the zinnia as if there was a leaf coming up into the zinnia. So that gets interpreted this way. You define the edge of the leaf, and then you fill that. So this paint I'm putting down is defining the edge of the leaf. And then these were foreshortened. All of these little guys over here, these petals, were foreshortened. So we're just seeing little blips of those. Here's another leaf, little bits over here, bits and pieces, right? Because of the foreshortening. And that comes up to this leaf, tucked around that leaf. And this leaf goes here, that leaf. So if I did it right, which I hope I have, this will be the edge of that leaf down there. Here's a little, this would be red. I don't know if it belongs to a leaf or it doesn't belong to a leaf. Okay, there was one more petal back here, one here, one there, one there. Okay, about time. Okay, I think that's the start on this zinnia, and hope I'll be able to finish up this week and show you tomorrow what it looks like. I finally finished the watercolor of the zinnias. At least I think it's finished. There's still one more thing I could do, but let me explain first what I did. What I wanted to have happen here was to have a very curvilinear rendition of the leaves. They are very undulating in their form, and I wanted to emphasize that, and also wanted to emphasize the density and the tangle of the leaves. So it may be done, but I may go back, take the yellow, highlight some of the yellows, take the cerulean, and put the shadows in cerulean. If I do that, I'll show it to you next time. Thanks for watching.